Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where we help investors get clarity in the chaos of the many mixed messages to allow them to develop financial freedom through property investment and smart money management. Now, I'm often asked, what would I do differently if I could live my investment journey all over again? I've certainly made my fair share of mistakes along the way and paid some huge learning fees because of that. However, instead of being defeated, I learned from each error, I moved forward. So if you asked me, what's the key to my investment success? I guess one of them would be the ability to pick yourself up from your setbacks, learn what you can from your mistakes, including your own limitations, and simply trying again. So to help prevent you from making the same mistakes I have, in today's show, Brett Warren, National Director of Metropole, and I are going to chat about 16 things I wish I knew before I started investing, or maybe earlier on in my investment journey. So let's get on with the show.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment, and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect, and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now, here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
Hi, Michael. Good to be with you.
Hey, thanks for coming back for our regular chats on the Michael Yardney podcast.
Yeah, look, 16 things I wish I knew. Gee whiz, I could probably put together twice the amount of that list, Michael. But I guess there's always things we wanted to do differently. And there's always things that I guess you live with a little bit of regret. I know you've made mistakes, I've made mistakes. But perhaps that's another reason why it's good to listen to these kinds of things, to learn from those mistakes, to make sure that others don't make those mistakes. And obviously we all go back in the past and change it if we could, but we can't. And there's no point dwelling on those things. So I guess it's about learning from those mistakes and understanding what to do to move forward to make us smarter investors and things as well. So property investing is also not easy,
is it? If you learn from your mistakes, then it's worthwhile, because no one likes it when it happens. When you go back over time, they really, as long as you do the right thing afterwards, it doesn't really change the long term that much, does it?
No, it doesn't. And I guess with property investing, it's completely different as well, because there's so many other dimensions. You know, we're talking about finance, we're talking about deposit and savings, we're talking about so many different things. So it's not just a simple decision you're making, and that adds a number of layers to complexity. So perhaps we can start off with number one, Michael. You can take us through the first lesson.
Well, if I wanted to learn the things earlier on in life, I think the value of education. I started off hungry. I started off poor. I started off wanting to be like the wealthy people. My parents were poor, but my parents' friends were rich. They owned real estate. My friends' parents were rich. They were my parents' friends. And so therefore I wanted to do what they did. And I started, there wasn't information, there wasn't the blogs, there wasn't the podcasts. So I started believing I knew enough to be successful, but that wasn't the case. I didn't even know what I didn't know, but there wasn't a way of doing it differently then. But my first couple of investments were successful. And I found that the worst thing that can happen to a beginning investor is to get it right first time. You think you're smarter than you are, when the truth in my early success was because I was carried by a rising market rather than my own brilliance, Brett.
Michael, that sounds a little bit familiar, doesn't it? Particularly with the last 5 years. I guess for people who have done that, as you said, I know you've said a number of times before, be careful if you've got lucky the first time and you haven't actually had a system and a strategy that's actually allowed you to do that. So perhaps it's a good opportunity for people who maybe have been successful to actually go back and work out why and if that's going to continue to be successful. And if you're not, then maybe speaking to someone as well. And I know education was a big part of my journey as well, Michael, and it's so much easier these days, isn't it? I can imagine what it was like back when you were around, but even when I was around, it was incredibly difficult.
Australian real estate, I had some American books there, and later on there were, but I did not even bother seeking out mentors or teachers early in the piece. It was, I'll be honest, took me a while to recognise the importance of education. So if I knew, I guess what we're talking about today is things I wish I knew earlier. I think I would have been an even more successful investor if I sought out teachers, mentors, consultants, rather than thought I could do it all myself. Because later on I learned from Warren Buffett, a rising tide lifts all ships, but when the tide goes out, you find out who's swimming naked. And that happened to me in the early 80s. So 10 years after I started investing, we had the first economic downturn and property values went down and the banks wouldn't lend me any money and interest rates went up. And I think there's going to be some people caught out similarly a little bit down the track this time around, Brett.
Yes, I tend to agree. It's going to be an interesting time. I guess the next thing, Michael, is when people are looking to invest in property, they think buying the property is actually the goal. They think that's the thing to do. I want to be a property investor. But I think one of the things I learned from yourself is actually understanding the end goal. What is the end goal? What do you want that to happen? Because then we can actually work towards that. And then the property we select, I don't think there's enough people that understand, will this property actually get to your end goal and what you want to do? So starting out with an end goal is incredibly important, isn't it?
Well, it is. Now, my end goal when I started was to be rich. I wanted to be a millionaire by the time I was 30. And this was in my early 20s when I first started investing. A millionaire today isn't really that rich anymore. That median price house is that nowadays. By the way, Brett, I didn't make it by 30, but I did make it, I think, by about 35. But if money's what you're chasing the wrong thing. And I learned that, unfortunately, the hard way. So too many people don't have a goal. You're 100% right. No, they want to buy a property. They think it's a good idea, but they buy maybe one, sometimes two. We know 92% never get past two, but usually in the suburb where they live, where they understand what they think they know. And that's not a goal. Property investment, buying an investment isn't a strategy. Going to an open for inspection around the corner from your home isn't research, is it?
No, it's definitely not. I think it's about having a plan and understanding that. But unfortunately, too many people do that. And then the other thing, I guess the big mistake, and we see it a lot, Michael, is people have secured a property, but it's not costing me anything. Look, I haven't lost any money on it. It hasn't grown in value. It's not costing me anything, but it actually has, because there's an opportunity cost, and it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars over a full property cycle.
The problem is, you're right, they don't realise until 8 or 10 years down the track. So one of my early mentors, one of the things I did do when I started to educate myself was I used to get tapes you put in the cars, then eventually CDs and then DVDs. But I learned a lot from a couple of people, Jim Rohn, Zig Ziglar, Brian Tracy. I was lucky enough to personally meet Brian Tracy. But Jim Rohn taught me that if you don't design your own life plan, chances are you're going to fall into somebody else's plan. And guess what they've got planned for you? Not much. So, yes, I believe you need to set your goals. And interestingly, Brett, that's why when we at Metropole see a client, before we even talk about property or location, we give them a plan, we work out where they want to go to make sure it works. Only 10 minutes ago, before we hopped onto this podcast, I answered a question for somebody on Property Update that left a question on one of the blogs about a particular suburb. And most people start with a suburb. And she asked, is it a good suburb? And the answer is, it wasn't a bad suburb in the outer suburbs of Melbourne. The problem is, I don't know if it's right for her. I don't know her age. I don't know what her timeframes are. I don't know if she's got other properties. I don't know if she's got a property in that area and was wanting confirmation or was thinking of buying something there. So what suits me? I wouldn't buy there. But for a beginner with a limited budget, it may be appropriate. So you've actually got to have a goal. And then, as you said a couple of minutes ago, the property's got to help get you to the goal. Otherwise, it's not the right one for you at that stage, at your stage of your cycle, of your life cycle.
Great point. Michael, you've mentioned mentors there, and I guess the third thing I want to talk about is actually having a team, and I think a mentor is a key part of that. But once you've kind of got that and you've got your plan, you've got your mentor and your guidance, you kind of got to come back and have a few people around you, don't you? And I believe that's part of why you started Metropole and created Metropole, but maybe talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, when I first started off, I thought I knew everything, and there weren't mentors, there weren't property strategists, there weren't buyer's agents. The knowledge of real estate in the 70s and 80s and early, even until the 2000s, was held by estate agents, because only once a year did you get things from, the information came from in Victoria was the valuer general who told you what happened to property prices, but the information was a year old. This was before the internet, and they had to collate the information and they had to wait to see what prices occurred at settlement. So it was much harder. So my mentors in those days were virtual mentors. Again, the CDs, the tapes, there wasn't groups of investors, and financial planners and accountants, mortgage brokers, they weren't even mortgage brokers around. So I think it's so much easier today to get a team around you, brains trust advisors. if you're the smartest person in the team, you're in trouble. So in my day, it was really hard to find one. I believe today, Brett, it's actually too easy because you don't know who to ask.
That's a really good point. The other thing as well, I think, Michael, is when you've got a team, it's good when everyone knows what the other person's doing and everyone can communicate and talk and relate to each other. That's part of having team and a good teamwork as well. I think people do go out and find different people and get different ideas and different things, and sometimes it just doesn't click and doesn't work as smoothly. And we've seen that happen a number of times during our process with people who bring in accountants or finance people from other areas, that it just doesn't click sometimes, does it?
It doesn't. Now, financial planners are not allowed by their professional indemnity insurance to even advise on property. And so the fact that they don't mention it, people think, oh, well, I shouldn't be investing in it. Accountants should be doing your tax or your structuring. Mortgage brokers should lend you money. I guess, I don't know who said that, but don't ask a hairdresser if you need a haircut. Be careful that somebody hasn't got a vested interest. And Brett, I hear you often say, follow the money trail.
Yeah, follow the money trail, absolutely. I know a lot of financial planners and people who even myself and yourself, Michael, I had someone the other day offer me a $1,000 commission, straight off the bat. And when you follow the money, for referring a client, to an off the plan or a property. And I think that's one of the mistakes the financial planners make, because they can't talk about it. They refer it to people like that and they get commissions and kickbacks out of it. So there's always a money trail, and following the money is always very well advised.
Sure.
Michael, number 4 on the list of 16 things I wish I knew when I started investing, perhaps something difficult to do, is start thinking rich rather than, I guess, poor or...
Well, again, this is things I wish I knew because I didn't know any different. I didn't know about the importance of the psychology of success. I just knew I wanted to be rich because I was poor. There were arguments at home about money. I had to do jobs when I was at school even, and then at university over Christmas. I packed toys at Christmas time at Walton's, a department store that isn't around anymore. 6 years in a row, every Christmas holidays, worked in Portman's, the fashion store, picking dresses off to go out to the shops. So the problem is, I learned the hard way that your income will seldom exceed your personal development. That's why, in my mind, it's important to develop the mindset of rich people. But you've got to hang around rich people to understand that how they think, and they think differently. It's not right, it's not wrong, it's different. So I only hung around, well, my parents and what I learned from them. To be blunt, they were lovely and they tried the best for me, but they were poor. So again, a quote from one of my early mentors, Jim Rohn, was, don't wish it were easier, wish you were better. Don't wish for fewer problems, wish for more skills. So you have to improve. Because if you suddenly get money, if you get a windfall, if you win the lottery, which is unlikely, or if you buy a property in the right location just because everything went up in Perth 20% or Adelaide 18% or Brisbane good double-digit growth, if you suddenly get a windfall but you personally haven't gotten to the next level to think like a wealthy person, boy, have we seen people lose it and sabotage themselves, haven't we?
Well, I think there's actually shown that, wasn't there, Michael? The lotto winners from where are they now 10 years ago, and many of them back to where they are because they haven't learnt how to think rich and behave in those kind of ways and have those kind of rich habits, which I know you talk a lot about. And I think we talked a little bit about if the world's wealth was spread evenly, it'd end up back where it was as well. And that's probably going along a similar path, isn't it?
Now, interestingly, once a year we get together with a whole lot of already very successful business people, entrepreneurs, investors at Wealth Retreat. When we rub shoulders with them, you can see that they do think differently. They're very driven, they're very resilient, but many of them have come from a poor background and have changed their way of thinking. And that's one of the great things. You can learn so much from these podcasts we run. You can learn so much from webinars that we run regularly or reading our blogs. But it's not the same as actually immersing yourself for 5 days with others who, having a mastermind of successful other investors, boy, the end result is very different, being part of that community, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly is. And that probably leads us to number 5. It's an abundant mindset. And that's something you talk a great deal about at Wealth Retreat. It's something that I have picked up a lot with successful people, people like yourself, other successful people who I've approached just to have a coffee with or talk. They've got this abundant mindset. They're willing to give time, but having that abundant mindset is not easy, is it?
Well, it's not. And it's interesting. Even those at Wealth Retreat we all in some ways believe we're not good enough, or we're going to the imposter syndrome, or we're striving to be better. To become successful, you do need an abundant mindset. And that's why at Wealth Retreat, one of the things we do is we talk about property, we talk about tax, we've got all the experts. You go into a lot of detail, very much detail about the research we do. But The first section, as you know, is we get rid of the disempowering thoughts and beliefs and instill a whole lot of empowering beliefs to give people an abundant mindset. I know the analogy we use there is think of yourself as a cup. If your cup's small, you can only accumulate a small amount of money. Any extra just spills over and you lose it. You simply can't have more money than the size of your cup. So you're right. Instead, we talk about developing an abundant mindset. Your cup, which deserves to be filled with success. Brett, I don't want a cup. I want a bucket.
Yep. Well, it's a good quote as well, isn't it? The mind should be working like a parachute, works best when it's open. And I think one of the big things I've realized and over my time is when I first started, I probably had a bit more of a closed mindset. Was I missing out on opportunities? Because the opportunities are abundant. They're always there. But if you've got a closed mind, you actually don't get to see them. And that's something I always thought you had to be, win lotto or do something amazing. But it's actually a series of small events. And if you don't rise above the cup size or rise above the temperature of where you need to be and get outside of your comfort zone, you do miss out on those opportunities.
Yeah, that's right.
Michael, one of the hardest things to do these days, everything's at the tip of your fingers. You can order food and drink and do whatever you want within 5 seconds. The biggest and hardest thing, I think, from a property investor perspective is actually to delay gratification. People get so sucked in by these cash flow and getting more cash flow right now. Do you need more cash flow? We all want more cash flow, right? But there's got to be some kind of sacrifice in the short term to get to the long term. And I think as a property investor, that's something I've done well, but it took me a while to realize that.
Well, it's one of the common themes in my mindset message at the end of every podcast. Do you really need that new pair of shoes, the smartphone or the fancy car? At the moment, with social media, you're actually looking at people's highlight reels. You're actually looking up at people who've actually succeeded a lot, but you're actually not looking down at how far you've already come. Most people listening to this, watching this in Australia or in the Western world, there's billions of people who'd trade anything to be where we are. So we are very lucky where we are. But that doesn't get you to the level of financial security or abundance. Too many people can't resist instant gratification. And it's so much easier, as you say now. In the old days, there wasn't, when I grew up, there wasn't credit cards. People can't imagine that. You used to have a lay-by plan.
Yeah.
You wanted to have things for Christmas. You'd go to the shop and they'd put it aside. Every Saturday you'd go and give them £5 or something. And over time, you'd be delaying the gratification, you'd eventually end up buying it. Having said that, you probably shouldn't have bought it in the first place. But to become rich, you really got to learn the delayed gratification because, as our mentor Warren Buffett said, wealth is the transfer of money from the impatient to the patient.
Well said. The other number 7 on the 16 things to wish we change would probably be overcoming your fears. And we can start pretty surface-based in terms of stepping outside your comfort zone, but this also runs fairly deep. And we talk about mindset and the type of mentality you need, and maybe some people are fearing success and other matters. So it can go quite deep, can't it?
Definitely. So I started investing without fear. I was actually over-optimistic and I was lucky. I was carried away by a property boom. Could have been the other way around. My timing wasn't right for any other reason than luck and fortuitous because inflation came in. But I know at the moment, with all the very mixed messages in the media, the uncertainty, the delays of interest rate falls, the worries about overseas issues, people are nervous. And fear is a powerful human emotion. Brett, it's a protective emotion. It's right. Your brain stops you doing things that seem risky. And I guess it's not a sound way of investing. And that's why I think having a team around you, and we talked about that a moment ago, is important because they're not only going to tell you what to do, but a good property strategist who's not selling you a property, hasn't got any stock there, doesn't have anything to sell in the way of property, but more in the way of advice, is going to tell you what not to do because they're going to see the landmines ahead because they've been around the block a couple of times. And that's one of the concerns I've got at the moment with this new breed of advisors that I'm finding on the internet. And I love following them, seeing them, hear what's going on. And we've been recently doing a series that we're going to be putting on social media about real estate rip-offs, the mistakes we're seeing people bring up. They don't understand the landmines. So should you be scared? No, you should be wary of being taken down the wrong path by people, having the right finance. But if you own the right property in the right ownership structure with the right finance to buy you time, I think you've also got to then step back and look at the big picture that over the long term, for 200 years, property in Australia has increased in value, and no reason that won't change. No reason it will change, I should say, Brett.
I agree. I remember signing the paperwork for my first property, Michael. I was $105,000 in debt, and I thought my life was over. I was very fearful, but as you said, as time goes on, my debt level is probably considerably more than that now, and it's a level of comfort. But you've got to get over that fear. But I think having the mentor and having the people who have been through and can guide you through that is a great way to overcome it. And that leads to number 8, which is obviously, if you do fail or if you aren't successful, don't let that hold you back.
Look, we all make mistakes, Brett. I did in my investing, in my personal life, in my business life. But the difference I've found mentoring a lot of successful people compared to the average Australian is successful people don't let failure hold them back. Instead, they get up and try again. Most people worry about all those things that will never happen. And that also helps or prevents them from achieving success. In my mind, you should save your worry for when there seems like there's nothing to worry about, because that's when you're going to get caught out.
I agree. I often do that as well. I think Brisbane's a good opportunity like that at the moment, Michael. Everything's going great for Brisbane. There's another prediction of 12 months of growth ahead. But that's the time to be a bit worried when everything's just going perfectly well. There's always something around the corner, isn't there?
Yes, there is. Well, let me make it clear then. I think that Brisbane's done really well. Adelaide and Perth property markets have even outperformed Brisbane. I think Adelaide and Perth, which started much cheaper than Brisbane, are not necessarily at their peak, but near. The fundamentals aren't there. They should not be more expensive than Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane. But having said that, or Melbourne and Brisbane, Sydney's a bit more expensive. But having said that, Brisbane, the underlying fundamentals of the Olympics it's probably only 8 years away now.
8 years now, yep.
Is going to make a difference. Not a short-term difference. We know that from Olympic Games all around the world, including Sydney. But it's all the jobs coming in over the next decade. It's the infrastructure that's going to be built that's going to stay in Brisbane. It's the fact that Brisbane is going to move from a new world city to on the map of people around the world. So when people from overseas wonder where they should travel, where they should go for a vacation, where they should go for a job, where they should invest, they know the Opera House, but they're going to get to know Brisbane too. So I have really strong feelings about the long-term fundamentals of the Brisbane market. Again, we're not trying to time the market, are we?
No. Do you think the brown Brisbane River will be as iconic as the Sydney Opera House or the Sydney Bridge? Or?
Well, look what happened to the latest Olympics, the Paris Olympics, where they were on the river there. So I don't know. Are they going to clean up the river? The Yarra River in Melbourne didn't do much for the Commonwealth Games.
That's right. Look, number 9 on the 16 things I wish I knew when I started investing. And this is a big one for me. It's the compounding and leverage and the power of it. We talked about it being the 8th wonder of the world. And it's a bit like a snowball, isn't it? It's really slow to get started and you've got to be patient. But boy, by the time you've gone through a property cycle or two, it can really ramp up.
That's right. So the big secret for property investment, as opposed to other investments, is the importance of leverage. In other words, yes, your property may go up 8% a year, but the return on your funds, the 20% deposit, is double, triple, quadruple that. And in fact, it compounds on the compounding. And I think the lesson from that is the earlier you start investing and the longer you hold your properties, allowing compounding and leverage to work, the more time your money's got to grow. And that's why we believe a long-term horizon is really important. And if that's the case, you don't have to be overly concerned about the ups and downs of the market. In fact, a large part of your asset base when you retire is not going to be the money you invested. It's not going to be the equity that you paid down in your mortgage. It's definitely not going to be the cash flow that you paid tax on. A large part of your asset base, if you get it right, Brett, is going to occur because of the capital growth on your investments, the properties that you've owned. That's how compounding works.
Yeah, you mentioned time there as well. And look, I've worked with a number of clients over the last decade, and I've had clients who are earning average wage and done better than people earning 2 or 3 times more because they've had a longer runway. They've taken action earlier. And we often see a lot of people around that kind of 40 to 45 age where they've just had children, they're coming out the other end. They realise they've only got a decade or two before they kind of retire and they've got to do something, versus those people who've actually put a few moves on the chessboard before they go through that phase, and that compounding has got them through and they're achieving their goals much faster. So time and compounding in the market is incredibly important.
So the lesson, as we said, is get in early, and that goes back to one of the earlier lessons, of course, too, delayed gratification. The sooner you can get in and allow compounding time, leverage to work, the better off you're going to be. Because maybe I could just jump to the next lesson. Property investment's not a get-rich-quick scheme.
You sure, Michael? You sure? I've seen on on social media that it is.
It is. You can make 100,000 before Christmas. You can flip a property. You can buy a property, flip it, and make 20% profit.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Just look back over the years and you can see that the property market goes up and goes down. But having invested for over 5 decades now, one of the lessons I've learned is property is not a get-rich-quick scheme. When we first started working together in Brisbane, there was long periods when on average, the Brisbane market hadn't done much at all. Now, we can outperform the markets by buying the right property, by adding value. And I remember when we were doing those client evenings in our Brisbane office years ago, you were able to come up with case studies of, look, the Brisbane market hasn't done well, but hang in there and look, you've still done okay. Anyone who would have bought a property in Brisbane for 350, 400,000, 500,000 a decade ago, look where they are now.
Well, we just had one of those, Michael. I actually just sat down with a client earlier this morning and we purchased something about 10 k's from Brisbane for 393,000. And it's just been revalued at 900,000. So there you go. That's a great example.
But it took time. Sure. And it's consistent. So I guess I love sharing quotes. Warren Buffett said, somebody's sitting in the shade today because somebody planted a tree a long time ago. So it's not a get-rich-quick scheme, but plant the seeds of your future success soon.
Another quote I'm going to throw back at you, Michael, because you told me this one. It is, don't make long-term decisions on the last 30 seconds of news. So number 11 is ignore the white noise.
Well, the media is always going to give you interesting stories. The media loves real estate stories, and those that predict property busts, property downturns, the truth is we haven't ever had a significant property downturn. So you've got to ignore the white noise and keep your eyes on your long-term goals. But again, only yesterday I saw something in the media in my newsfeed that came up saying that property investors are deserting. Sorry, wrong. It was actually wrong. It was tenants. It was a story on the tenants are deserting Victoria and property investors are going to suffer because vacancy rates have gone up 30%. Well, boy, that attracted my attention. So the clickbait worked. The media got what it wanted. I looked on the page of a very large property portal, which was having ads there to give me that people were paying them for. And the vacancy rate in Victoria went up from 1.1 to 1.3. Yes, 30%. It was a 30-ish sort of percent increase, but still tenants aren't abandoning residential real estate. They got nowhere to go. So be careful because that's still a very, very low, historically low vacancy rate. You and I deal with the media a lot. They ask our opinions and there's some great journalists out there, but there's others who really don't know a lot and they are very much fed by the media releases people are giving them and they're looking for negative news. So yes, your lesson is correct. Ignore white noise.
Number 12, Michael, both capital growth and cash flow are important.
Well, when I first started investing, I wanted to, be that millionaire. So I was looking for capital growth. In my mind, residential real estate is a high growth, relatively low yield investment. But the key to wealth creation is to grow your substantial asset base of investment grade properties. So in the future, you can have all the cash flow you want. But I learned the important lesson of cash flow in the recession of the 1990s. That was when interest rates went up. A lot of young people have heard it went up to 16, 17, 18%. Tenants went down. In Victoria, we had the recession we had to have. And that's when I realised that I actually managed to get through that because I did have the cash flow, more because I was fortuitous and owned the right properties. So while capital growth gets you out of the rat race, you need solid cash flow to keep you in your game. Look, it's much of the same today in the more difficult lending environment. but you shouldn't sacrifice capital growth for short-term cash. I believe you should have a cash flow buffer. And I know when clients come to Metropole and your team put a strategic plan together, there's a property plan, an asset protection plan, eventually a living off equity or living off your property plan. But along the way, a large part of it is a finance plan, because we often say property investment's a game of finance with some houses thrown in the middle. So having a cash flow buffer to see you through those eventual inevitable rainy days, whether it's COVID, whether it's economic downturns, you've got to protect yourself. So we allow our clients to buy time as well as properties. Having the cash flow buffer buys them time. So you need cash flow and capital growth together. In fact, I've often talked about you need two businesses. You need a business that brings in cash flow. That could be, if some people have got a profession, some people have got a retail business, that cash flow keeps going in, while on the side you have business number two, your property business, which is a capital growth business as the value of the properties goes up. And eventually your property business will eventually in the long term bring out cash flow, and then you can leave your job, you can leave your profession, you can sell your retail business, whatever. But to start off with, you do need a cash flow business and a capital growth business, Brett.
Thank you, Michael. Number 13 on the 16 things I wish I knew before I started investing is location, location, location. It's not negotiable, is it? We want to make sure that 80% of where we're buying is the location, and we just can't afford to get that wrong.
Well, location does 80% of the heavy lifting, as you're right. And so therefore, I know you do a lot of research looking at a top-down approach at getting the right locations, not the next hotspot. Boy, have we been around long enough to see that this year's hotspot is next year's not spot. And there's been some hotspots that have actually lasted a couple of years this cycle. But that same, you mentioned the mining boom before, it's been the same in the past as well. So you're wanting an area that's going to outperform the averages because of the local location, but because of the people in that location, because people want to live in that location, people want to buy in that location, people can afford to. And it's really only your occupiers that drive that, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, people with more affluence and who are driven to those areas because of good schools and local access to employment hubs, green space, convenience, walkability, things like that as well. Very high on the list. Number 14, Michael, is don't throw your money away. What do you mean by that?
Well, to become rich, you're going to need to spend less than you earn, save the difference, and eventually invest it. That's an old rule that goes back to a book written a century ago, The Richest Man in Babylon. I think beginners should not underestimate the importance of this simple, well, seemingly simple message, but it actually is important. The problem is too many people throw away their money buying things they don't need with money they don't have to impress other people. And if you don't know how to take care of your money, money's going to stay away from you. A lot of Australians are not financially fluent. They're teased to spend their money with social media nowadays, aren't they?
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely. Two more to go, Michael. Number 15 is gratitude is important. What's that got to do with property investing?
Well, wealth means different things to different people, but I've learned over the years that true wealth has nothing to do with how many properties you got or how much money you have. True wealth is what you're left with when they take all your money away and your properties away. Somebody we both know very well, a good friend of both of ours, has recently had a severe injury, illness, a back injury, a back operation. He's been out of action. He's been in pain and doped up with medication. And I've got a little twinge in my back, Brett, and it worries and annoys me. And then I have to think, no, look, I'm so lucky. I could have been like this other friend of ours who had to have a 3-hour operation and isn't going to be able to get around for another month or so. I'm lucky I've got my wife who loves me. I've got kids. I've got a good family. I've got good friends like you. And so therefore, that, to be blunt, it also took me a while because I was in a hurry to get rich. And I came from a background that it wasn't a happy household. But boy, every morning, and you've heard me say this before I get out of bed, I have to remind myself, 3 things I'm grateful for, but that happened yesterday, because I used to always say the same thing for my health, my wife, my kids. No.
Yep.
What happened yesterday that I'm grateful for? It makes me realise how lucky we are living in this country.
Most definitely, particularly with what's going on around the rest of the world today. Last but not least, Michael, and this is something we both do, is we give to the community. We also give to charity. We obviously donate to charities. I sponsor children. We had an amazing charity ball this year for very special kids, and we did Hummingbird House last year, where we raised a huge amount of money for the community and those very special kids. It's something that's important, isn't it? Giving back.
I believe it's important not just to be grateful, but to give back to the community and charity. I think the responsibility when you get to the top is to help others up as well in this country, not knock others down. And I know it's not just charity. Part of what we're doing, look, we run a business and we get a lot of clients coming from these podcasts, but the vast majority, thousands and thousands of people listen to this and don't become clients of Metropole, don't come to Wealth Retreat. It doesn't matter. We feel good that we've actually helped people. And it's a nice feeling when somebody taps you on the shoulder at the restaurant. Hey, I love your podcast. Boy, I read your books and it's helped me. That makes me feel really good. So I think we're extraordinarily lucky and it's important to give back. It's our responsibility to give back, Brett.
Very good. Thank you, Michael. Those are the 16 things I wish I knew before I started investing. I appreciate you sharing your thoughts there. And I'm sure everybody found that very useful.
Well, again, it's not just listening to this, but actually doing something. And so part of the challenge is not just getting knowledge, but taking action. That's where the power is. Again, something I was taught by one of my mentors. And one of my suggestions would be, if any of this resonated and you would like to get to the next level, go to wealthretreat.com.au, because once a year, Brett and I host Wealth Retreat on the Gold Coast for already successful property investors, business people, entrepreneurs. Don't count yourself out. There'll be a link in the show notes. And it's not a property seminar. It's actually helping you design the next 5 years of your life. And the theme this year is, where are you going to be in 2030? Hey, that's going to be 5 years away, Brett. That's scary when you think about it that way. So on that basis, we'd love to invite you to join us. And you're going to speak to one of the team who's going to have the opportunity to see if it's right for you, and if it's not, we'll tell you. And if you don't think you're ready for that, again, don't count yourself out. Brett, how can your team at Metropole help people who are listening to this or watching this on YouTube to actually make 2025 the best year in their property?
Yeah, well, we're talking about wishing we knew things and making mistakes and overcoming things. I think just sitting down and making sure that people can get some clarity. And there's a lot of chaos and a lot of mixed messages, a lot of white noise that we spoke about. So giving some clarity through that and getting a specific circumstance. It may be by taking action. It may just be by, you call it hibernating for 12 months, getting through the next 12 months and regrouping. And I think having that certainty around what happens next in conjunction with the longer term just gives people peace of mind.
So why not go to metropole.com.au and organise a time for a complimentary wealth discovery chat, where we're going to actually, you're going to have a chat with one of our wealth strategists about where you are, where you want to go to. We'll find out a bit more about you. You'll find out a bit about us, and you'll find out that we're much more than a buyer's agent. We actually help our clients safely grow, protect, and pass on their wealth to future generations through strategic property and wealth advice. Sure, some people think, oh, you're too big, you don't care. Brett, you look after you're so detailed and involved in every client. Sure, I've stepped back a bit, but we're big enough to tip the scales in our favour, in your favour, but we're still small enough to care, aren't we?
We definitely are. 100%.
Okay, look forward to catching up with you again next week on another episode of the podcast, Brett.
Thanks, Michael. Great to chat.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
My mindset message for you today is short and sweet. It's a little poem, I came across, and I really wanted to share it with you because I know some people listening to this, watching this, are having a bit of a tough time. So here's the poem that I recently read. When things go wrong, as they sometimes will, when the road you're trudging seems all uphill, when the funds are low and the debts are high, and when you want to smile, that you have to sigh, when all is pressing you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't you quit. Success is failure turned inside out, the silver tent on the clouds of doubt, and you can never tell how close you are. It may be near when it seems far. So stick to the fight when you're hardest hit. It's when things go wrong that you must not quit. I guess that's the message of today's Short mindset message. When things go wrong, you must not quit. Success comes to those who persevere and get up once again. So whatever's happening in your life, you haven't come this far just to come this far. Keep going. Thank you for spending the last little while with me. I hope you got some benefit from this show. But before you move on to the next podcast you're going to listen to, let me remind you I have another show that I produce once a week with leading demographer Simon Kirstenmacher. We call that Demographics Decoded, where Simon and I unveil the trends that are going to shape your future. In my mind, this is a must-listen to podcast for anyone interested in property investment, but also for business people and entrepreneurs. So if you don't currently subscribe to Demographics Decoded, just please stop for a second and subscribe on your podcast app where you're listening to this, or on YouTube. And of course, if you don't subscribe to this show, the Michael Yardney podcast, why not click the link that says follow or subscribe wherever you're listening right now. So twice a week, you're going to get benefit from my guests and me. And I'd like to ask you a little favour, please. If you did enjoy today's show and you know somebody who would also benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast and Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcasts, there are 3 little buttons at the top of the player. Or just tell them about it. Just have a chat with them. Now, I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you're definitely going to be doing me a favour in my quest to help as many people as possible to become financially literate. And by the way, I've got a special bonus for you. As my way of saying thank you for subscribing, just go to podcastbonus.com.au. There'll be a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where I've got a bunch of ebooks and reports. It's just my way of saying thank you for taking the time to listen. And remember, the information that we give you in this podcast is general information, not specific information about your personal circumstances, because we don't know about them. But if you do want specific information, you can always have a chat with my team at Metropole. Go to metropole.com.au. If you really want to learn more, you can always listen to the previous podcast, the many episodes we've already published. Just go back to the old episodes, which each have lessons about property investment, success, and money. Once again, thanks for listening to today's show.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favorite Android app as the Michael Yardney podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success, and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael, but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?